Hello, hello, everyone. Welcome. We're just going to give everyone a moment to come in. So nice seeing all of your names. Yes, welcome, everybody. We're just going to take about 60 seconds, let everybody come on in, get settled. It's a great moment to just kind of center yourself and be present. I know these days they can go fast, and a lot of us been working, meeting with clients, all kinds of things going on. It's a great time just to take a deep breath, have that mindful moment, collect pen and paper if you want to take notes, light a candle. I'm big on having scents, so I've got a diffuser going. Make sure you have water. Got my water bottle. Make sure you're all ready to just take some time to focus on yourself and your coaching practice and just set yourself apart from all the busyness of the day. Yeah, letting everybody trickle in. I'm really excited to talk about this. This is a topic very near and dear to my heart, and something that I think all of us, just with the world right now, it's definitely timely. So super excited to dive into it. Just gonna let everybody come in. There we go. Still see the numbers climbing a little bit, so we'll wait just a moment. There we go. All right, since it's 2 minutes after, we'll go ahead and get started. And as people trickle in, they can just join us, no problem. But welcome to our webinar today. We're going to be talking about coaching in the presence of trauma. Oh, let's see real quick. There we go. My name is Ashlee Honeycutt. I am the Director of Health Coaching Operations here at YourCoach Health. I'm also a board certified health and wellness coach myself. I'm really excited to see you guys here. See lots of names I recognize from the platform in the chat and in our participant view. Others I recognize from the webinar we just did a couple months ago on imposter syndrome, and some new names. So welcome. I'm so glad that you are here. For those of you that aren't familiar with YourCoach, what is YourCoach, right? We are an end-to-end HIPAA compliant practice management platform where you have all the tools that you need to practice with your own clients in one space. That's everything from chat, HIPAA compliant video sessions, session notes, library, all of those tools and support to level up your practice. We also have these great webinars for your continuing education needs and more. We have topics from legal experts to business coaches, access to tools and resources. The list just goes on. We are also the only operating system for behavior change powered by health and wellness coaches. We're working tirelessly to forge partnerships with organizations across industries, communicating the unmatched value that health coaching can offer their clients, members, and talents. We match participating individuals with validated and credentialed coaches like you, who are actively practicing on the YourCoach platform, providing that hands-on support as they grow through their individualized coaching programs. And through all of these partnerships, we're creating a health coaching ecosystem built to empower health coaches to deliver their services to even more individuals across the globe. We're introducing health coaches to more individuals, organizations, and communities than ever before, championing real health change through verified science-backed methodologies. Especially as we see the healthcare system transform rapidly to a well-care system, health coaches are spearheading that paradigm shift to fulfill the growing demand for a holistic approach to health. Factoring in all those things you guys work so well in, the physical, the mental, the emotional, so much more. And that's exactly our mission that you see here. By the year 2030, for the projected 8.5 billion people in the world to have access to health coaches, creating more happy and healthy humans. So we're super excited about that mission. We're super excited about all the coaches that are joining us on that. And now just by you being here, you joining us on that as well. So what does that mean for coaches that are part of our platform of YourCoach Health? It means access to new platform features and updates. We're constantly rolling out new and innovative features to help you manage your practice. It means new client opportunities, helping you fill your digital wallet by connecting our validated and contracted coaches with clients that are ready to be coached. That means no sales calls, no discovery calls, just real health coaching. It also means access to a coaching community. That's opportunities to connect and collaborate with fellow health and wellness coaches. It means mentoring, which is opportunities to level up your coaching skills or mentor others in growing their coaching toolbox. And it also means access to continuing education like this webinar, where you can meet your CEU needs for NBHWC and continue to grow as a coach. So I wanted you to understand a little bit about who YourCoach is and who we are, because I am super proud to be part of the YourCoach community. And I know we have lots of coaches here contributing to our mission. I think it's really, really cool. So just want to take a moment to let you know who we are, what we're about, as we dive into what is trauma and how do we coach in the presence of trauma. So we're just going to settle in here for a moment. And I just want to take a quick moment to kind of give a brief warning here that first off, we're going to be touching on some pretty sensitive topics today. And it's sensitive in the nature of trauma. So please, please, please take some time to ground yourself, take good care of yourself during this time. You may need to take a moment to mute this presentation, to step away, to do some deep breathing, and that's okay. Give yourself permission to be kind to yourself. Stay aware of yourself during this webinar. Stay aware of your feelings, how physically you're reacting to things. We will touch on some difficult subjects. I will always give you a warning before we do, so that if you do want to mute, you are able to. There will also be a brief mention of abuse and assault on slide 6. And again, I will give you a warning about that we're going to touch on that, so that if you prefer to step away during that 1 minute, you'll be able to mute and step away and then come back. So please feel free to do what you need to do during this time. Want to invite you just to kind of take that deep breath. This can be a very emotionally heavy topic, but I hope that it's one that we can explore together and give you those tools to help you as you're coaching your clients, and both, help you as well as you're navigating this within yourself, so that you can also move forward. So with that being said, I kind of want to open us up with a little bit of an activity. Again, permission to participate or not participate according to your comfort level. But when we pull this up in this idea of what is trauma, this word, it can evoke all kinds of feelings and emotions and even a physical response. So when we say the word trauma, what feelings does that word evoke for you? Just take a moment to reflect on that. If you have pen and paper, you can write down those thoughts. If it's something that you're comfortable sharing, you can drop that into the chat. I'd love to see what those feelings evoke. There's no right or wrong answer here. It evokes many different things in all of us. I would just love to hear what it evokes in you, or just take that moment to quietly do that for yourself. We'll take about 30 seconds. It's incredibly simple and incredibly complex at the same time, isn't it? When we look at definitions for trauma, there's all kinds of different definitions, different words that are used, different parameters that are used, and they range from, again, being incredibly simple and succinct in definition to incredibly complex and many things in the English language. It can run the gamut, and we're going to talk about that. I wanted to start with a super simple definition by Dr. Dan Siegel. He's a clinical professor of psychiatry at the UCLA School of Medicine. And he says that trauma is an experience we have that overwhelms our capacity to cope. So it seems so simple, right? An experience we have that overwhelms our capacity to cope, but that's incredibly complex in nature. And then also psychology today takes that one step further. And they said trauma is a person's emotional response to a distressing experience. Few people can go through life without encountering some kind of trauma. Unlike ordinary hardships, traumatic events tend to be sudden and unpredictable, involving a serious threat to life, like bodily injury or death, and feel beyond a person's control. Most important, events are traumatic to the degree that they undermine a person's sense of safety in the world and create a sense that catastrophe could strike at any time. Two very similar yet very different definitions in there. Actually, trauma comes from the Greek word for wound, and that's really accurate. It's not necessarily a specific event that happens, but rather the consequences of experience or the wounds that we are left with. All trauma involves a very real or perceived loss of control and a level of threat to life that is highly intensive, where escape is not possible. And it causes that fight or flight response to be replaced by a freeze or fragment response. So here's where I'm going to give that little bit of a warning here. This slide does contain written references to assault, violence, and abuse as examples. So if this is content that you do not wish to see or hear, please mute your speaker and feel free to turn away from your screen for 1 minute. We're going to talk about the 3 common types of abuse. The first one is going to be acute. This is a single incident. So one incident where you were called a name, you were in a singular car accident, you experienced a singular event of assault. Research from the Centers for Disease Control, the CDC, found that 1 in 5 Americans has been sexually molested as a child. 1 in 4 has been beaten by a parent. 1 in 4 of us grew up with alcoholic relatives. And 1 out of 8 has witnessed their mother being beaten or hit. Those are appalling numbers and really heavy to sit with when you start thinking about that. And it's far beyond what most practitioners expect, and certainly beyond what I expected as a health and wellness coach. So we have this acute examples of trauma. There's also chronic examples. These are going to be repeated, prolonged experiences. Some examples of that would be repeated bullying, domestic violence, and ongoing abuse. The third type of common trauma is complex. This is exposure to multiple events or types of trauma. So this could be things like a series of traumatic events. This could be neglect over time. This could be human trafficking. Lots of examples could fit in here. The difference being, of course, acute is one time. Chronic is something that happens over a series of time, and complex is going to be a mix of those two. There are other types. Oh, there we go. There are other types of trauma, of course. These would just be the 3 most common types. So why talk about coaching in the presence of trauma, right? First, we need to. The world is full of people who are actively experiencing trauma. Things like job losses, economic recession, war, the pandemic. We can make a list a mile long, right? Yet if we look at most coaching books, you won't see the word trauma listed in the index. I think that's really curious. Why is that? Well, my opinion, and this is again just my personal opinion, I think it's because it's a strong word with a really strong response. So if you think back to that first exercise where we looked at what the word trauma brought up emotionally or even physically within ourselves and what it evoked, you can see it's a powerful word that evokes some strong feelings. So let's take that a step further. If I came to you and I said, hey, I've got a client that I want to recommend to you that's experiencing some intense trauma in their life right now, and I would like you to coach them. What's your initial gut response to that? Just immediately off the bat, are you going, yes, please, I want to work with them? Or are you going, oh, I don't know. You might have some anxiety. You might have some caution around that. Or you might have an immediate thought of, that's outside of my scope. I can't do that. Yes, I see all the chat going, refer. All those little flags and alarm bells are going off, right? Of course they are. And that's okay. That's expected. It's a very valid concern. It makes us cautious of going outside of our scope. We relate that word to therapy and looking backwards, and we find it has a really negative connotation. Yet all words have levels of intensity, right? So take love, for example. Today's my anniversary. I can say, I love my husband. I love my kids. I love fresh baked sourdough bread. I love House of Dragons on HBO. It's not the same, right? It's not the same love. They all are things that I love, but not at the same intensity. The same goes for trauma. There are varying degrees and needs. The terminology is really the challenge. The words trauma and traumatized are used in these varying degrees in ways that cause confusion and concern. Here's another little warning I'll give you. The slide does contain written references to some mass violence that we're going to talk about. And if this is content you don't wish to see or hear, again, you can mute your speaker for about 30 seconds and feel free to turn away from your screen for about 30 seconds. So a couple of examples of that. Someone can say it was a major trauma. And that could be something like a mass shooting. That is going to be a major trauma that someone might have been through. They could say something like, they were highly traumatized, and that could be victims of the mass flooding that happened in the Northeast, or someone who was just part of a hurricane in Florida. They could say it was a traumatic experience. That could be something like falling off your bike or breaking your arm as a child. Or we could use it flippantly and say, it was so traumatic, I don't even want to talk about it. And we really mean getting our toddler dressed in the morning before daycare. It can be used in so many different ways. So no wonder we get a little bit anxious when we think about coaching around trauma. It's so unclear what we're even talking about. Yet when trauma at any degree exists, it can get in the way of effective coaching and of personal development. That's why we need to understand coaching in the presence of trauma. We also know that the brain-body connection is real. When we experience this real or perceived threat, our brain's alarm system gets triggered and it just starts going off, right? This alarm system involves a region of the brain called the amygdala, which Dr. Vanderkolk refers to as the brain smoke detector. If you haven't read The Body Keeps the Score by psychiatrist and author Bessel van der Kolk, I highly recommend it. And quite a few slides have taken from his readings. So you'll see him referenced here. Wonderful read if you want more information. So all of this gets activated in the amygdala, and this little alarm bell is going off. And when the amygdala senses a threat, so for example, you're walking down the street and you see something or someone that represents a threat to you, it recruits this stress hormones in the autonomic nervous system to orchestrate this whole body response that propels us to either run or hide or fight, or even on occasion, just to freeze in order to confront the threat. So in these moments, we might notice a quicker heart rate, really shallow breathing, we might start sweating a little bit, and we might have the inability to think clearly. So simultaneously, our frontal lobes, which Dr. Vanderkolk refers to as the watchtower, offers a view of the scene from above. In many cases, they can help us respond to a false alarm and turn off that smoke detector in our brain. With PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, however, that balance between the amygdala and the frontal lobe, it shifts, and it makes it much harder for the brain to recognize that the alarm is likely unwarranted. So sometimes people have things going on that will make it much more difficult to recognize a real authentic threat versus a perceived threat. And so just being aware, as coaches, we do not need to diagnose that. We do not need to try to figure out if it's real or perceived. That would definitely be outside of our scope, but just being aware that there could be other things that might play into that traumatic response is helpful. So as a result, the parts of our brain that are on the lookout for danger are always on alert. Even the slightest sign of a threat can trigger this amygdala, and its overactivity might keep us trapped in a prolonged state of emotional reactivity. And that can take its toll on the body. In fact, according to Dr. Vanderkolk, there are many examples where trauma is actually connected to physical symptoms. Lots of physical symptoms can happen. For example, they could be things like chronic back and neck pain, migraines, fibromyalgia, digestive problems, chronic fatigue, spastic colon or irritable bowel syndrome, and some forms of asthma. Traumatized children actually have 50 times the rate of asthma as their non-traumatized peers. Studies have shown that many children and adults with fatal asthma attacks were not aware of having breathing problems before the attacks occurred. When people are chronically angry or scared, that constant muscle tension ultimately leads to spasms and back pain and migraine headaches, to fibromyalgia and other kinds of pain. And this is all documented. There's some wonderful research studies that Dr. Vanderkolk points out in this book. So again, if you want more information on that and you want to dive deeper into that, I highly recommend picking up that book to get that deeper dive. So these individuals that are having these physical symptoms, they may go and visit multiple specialists. They may undergo extensive diagnostic tests. They may be prescribed medications. And the measures may provide temporary relief, but none of them are addressing this underlying cause. Another common symptom is alexithymia, in which a person reports feeling physically uncomfortable without being able to describe exactly what the problem is. And it comes from this form of self-numbing, which keeps them from responding to the ordinary needs of their bodies in quiet, mindful ways. So you might see them shifting around in their chair a whole lot. They might start stretching. They might be drinking water constantly. They might feel the need to pace a whole lot. At the base of it, though, if you're not aware of what your body needs, you're unable to take care of it. So this idea of recognizing the physical symptoms and getting to the underlying cause is something that health and wellness coaches are so familiar with. But again, we want to be careful of our scope here. We're not prescribing, we're not diagnosing, we're not treating anything, but we can work with clinical professionals who have given that information to their client. We can also help to call out that information that we're noticing in a session. So if we're noticing a client who is constantly shifting and moving around, we can call that out and say, hey, I'm noticing you're shifting a whole lot. Can you tell me more about that? Or is something uncomfortable? Or you can dive into that a little bit more and ask questions, right? Because they can give you more information. We just want to make sure we're staying within our guardrails of scope there. Which of course leads us into that big question of how is coaching different from therapy? While the body keeps the score is all about therapy, no doubt about it. It also has lots of nuggets that we can take away as coaches, both in an education and a practical sense. So yes, absolutely, coaching is not therapy. We can't say that enough, right? Coaching is not therapy. And great coaching can be non-clinically therapeutic and powerful. It's not a but, it's an and, right? Great coaching can do lots of wonderful things for clients. Therapy usually involves that deep, intensive process of self-exploration in which painful feelings are often brought to the surface and into the light of full awareness, and that allows healing from emotional pain. Whereas coaching can be non-clinically therapeutic in that it can be an achievement of healthy and favorable outcomes for the client through supporting the tapping into and mobilization of inner resources and strengths to bring about that desired personal growth and change. This requires coaches with well-resourced toolboxes who recognize that a natural space exists in which coaching and therapy may have modalities that overlap, right? We may use some of the same tools, and who are skilled at recognizing when referrals are needed, making those referrals, and doing so in a manner that does not leave the client feeling abandoned or further harmed. That can be tough, but we're going to get to those tools, don't worry. The coaching experience of being compassionately and deeply heard is a powerful, powerful trauma mitigator, as are the skills of recognition, naming, and moving towards that choice and decision. And while the coaching industry has historically been reluctant to a certain extent to step into that space of strong emotion with clients, it is in fact a space in which experienced coaches can be particularly useful. Foundational coaching skills of perspective taking, appreciative inquiry, framing and facilitating movement into choice and decision are powerful techniques. When you add that trauma-aware lens that recognizes and holds space for points of acute harm when they arrive, it's a natural expansion of the scope of practice for mature coaches. Now, it's important to note that while the webinar we're going through right now, it touches on the subject, it is but a very brief introduction, right? If it's something you're interested in learning more about, I would encourage you to seek one of the many trauma-informed coaching certification courses that go into far more detail than we could ever cover in this hour. But man, health and wellness coaches have such an opportunity to sit in this space with clients in a really unique way and have really powerful impact. Which also leads me to one of my favorite phrases: when in doubt, refer it out. If you ever have a question that you are in scope, it is better to refer them out to a clinical professional. And knowing and being confident in your scope is really, really important. Actually, I heard a really wonderful analogy a while back. I heard it from Susanna Cooper, and I think it beautifully illustrates the health and wellness coach practice. So if we picture a client's emotions and traumas as a giant iceberg, like you see here on the screen, we can see just the tip of it that's above the waterline. And we know that there's this giant brick underneath it, right? We can't see it, but it's important to know that it's there. And as coaches, we can put on our snorkel gear. That's what we have been equipped with. So we have this snorkel gear and we can snorkel around the surface. And occasionally we can take a deep breath in, dive down and explore the iceberg that's underwater, but we can't stay there long. We don't have the tools to stay down there long. We're only in snorkel gear. And it's only with the intent when we dive down that we're going to come right back up to the surface again. Whereas a therapist or a clinical professional has scuba gear, right? They've got a whole different set of gear that they get into the water with. They can dive down, they can stay as long as they want, they can explore all the nooks and crannies. And it's so true when it comes to coaching. We take that brief dive down for clarity or for context, and we can ask that question, but it's always a brief moment when we're holding our breath and we're returning to the surface as fast as possible again to get us focused on moving forward. If we find that we're getting stuck under the water, then we know that we don't have the right tools, right? We don't have that scuba tank to give us that oxygen down there. We need to make that referral out to someone who does have those tools. So how do we know when to refer out? There's a couple of ways that would be flags for us to know. Here's when we need to refer out. First, we need to learn to recognize signs of trauma. We can learn the physiological indicators of trauma. So this is where we can stay present, be aware of a nervous system response. Things like the client, if we notice them sweating, if we notice pupils dilated, if we notice agitation, or on the other end, if we notice fogginess, sleepiness, being uncomfortable. We could look for voice changes, visually being anxious or sweating, shaking, being hypervigilant or hyperaroused. This is going to throw up that red flag, right? That opportunity that we can be curious and we need to pause and we need to look a little bit further. We can offer that safe space to navigate these present moment feelings. So we can sit with them in that moment and allow them to process it on their own. We can ask if they would like to discuss some in-moment skills to manage or regulate, like taking a deep breath together. We can follow any action plans that we have in place, which we'll get into in just a little bit. And of course, if you work for a company or for a practitioner, you probably have some kind of protocol or best practice to follow in these moments as well. We also can look at the window of tolerance. Again, this is by Dr. Dan Siegel. We referenced him on the first slide with his definition of trauma. When we look at this, we want to see, are we within the window of tolerance or is the client outside of it? We're going to dig in a little bit deeper to what that means, but a couple of clues that we may be outside this window of tolerance would be behaviors are interfering with the client's daily life. So if the client is not able to function in their day, there's a good chance that we are outside that window of tolerance. Another one is we feel that there are too many barriers or they're becoming stuck for extended periods of time in a certain issue. So maybe that could be with the client themselves, maybe it's within a emotion they're battling with, maybe it's a particular situation that's coming up. And if they're not finding any solutions or way to move out of that stuck area, then we want to be able to talk to the client about a referral. And if the issues are psychological in nature and they're deeply seated in emotional traumas, then we want to make sure that the client is getting the best resources possible, that they're open to being referred, and that we are only in their best interest when we're suggesting this. So here you can see a really wonderful physical representation of the window of tolerance. It was a concept originally developed by Dr. Dan Siegel to describe the optimal zone of arousal for a person to function in everyday life. So when a person is operating within this optimal arousal band in the middle, they can effectively manage and cope with their emotions. So for clients who have experienced trauma, it's often difficult to regulate emotions, and the zone of arousal where they can function effectively becomes really narrow. So when a client's traumatized, it can be especially difficult for them to stay grounded in the present because the past is more vivid and intrusive. So someone who's constantly living in their past trauma is primed to detect threat, and they enter into that state of defense, and it means they have a really narrow window of tolerance, right? So what can that look like? Hyperarousal is going to be anxious, angry, out of control, overwhelmed, panicked, fearful, defensive. The body is in that fight or flight. They want to just run away or they want to fight. It's not something they can choose. The reactions just take over. Hyperarousal tends to keep the mind stuck on, and it makes it difficult to sleep, eat, manage emotions, or even to just concentrate. If hyperarousal reaches that most intensified level, they may disassociate, and they may have some rage and hostility that would normally not be part of that client's response. On the opposite end of the spectrum, you have hypoarousal. This is where the client may display some behaviors that are kind of spacey. They're zoned out, they're numb, they're frozen, they have a lack of energy, there's reduced physical movement. The body just wants to shut down. Again, it's not something that they choose, the reactions just take over. Hypoarousal can also impact sleep and eating habits, leaves people feeling emotionally flat. They'll be unable to express themselves, process their thoughts and emotions, or even respond physically. It's important to remember when the body responds defensively, it's just trying to keep us safe. It's a normal response when you're put in an unsafe position. However, trauma and extreme stress can create these similar responses that stick with us, even long after the event has passed, right? And that's where we get into this idea of trauma. So we want to just take a quick moment and ask yourself, when you start to notice these things within yourself, you notice these periods where maybe you get into hypoarousal or hyperarousal and you're outside this optimal arousal round in this window of tolerance, what do you do for yourself? How would you recognize that you yourself are in those states? How do you come out of it? Because chances are at some point within a coaching session, you might come out of your optimal arousal zone. You might be outside your window of tolerance. How do you bring yourself back into that? When it's clients, you can take a pause. You can ask if it's okay to take a pause and breathe with them for a second, saying something like, would it be okay with you if I shared with you some aspects of our conversation that I feel like we could take a break together and reflect for a moment? I think I'm recognizing a little bit of anger in your voice, and I just want to check in with you and see, are you okay? Because I really care about you, and I really want us to stay connected through this. I also want to recognize if we're going into territory where we may need additional support. It's okay to call those things out. They can be uncomfortable, but it's okay. So how do we gently make that referral? It can be difficult. We don't want to put the client off. We don't want them to feel like they're being shoved off to someone else. We don't want to make them feel like this is unusual. So how do we do that? First, we ask ourselves, can I hold what we're going through together? Can I hold this? Do I know what to ask or do next? If you have an action plan, you might feel more prepared for this, but it's okay to be a little bit nervous. But recognizing when we're out of scope is the very first piece. Recognize when we're beginning to get outside of our circle of confidence. Be comfortable saying something like, hey, based on the territory we're in now, I really want you to feel fully supported. And I want you to get the absolute best care and support. And I'm beginning to question whether I have the competence to support you here. Can we pause here and have a conversation about that? That's okay. Acknowledge that it's okay to not be comfortable. If you were in the imposter syndrome webinar we did back in July, then we chatted about how it's totally normal and expected to feel uncomfortable in these situations because we're not trained to be the right person in this moment. The use of simply, I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere until we get more help together takes away the stress of having to figure it out or do the right thing. Especially if you're a newer coach, you may feel like you're really unequipped to deal with crisis. Just being present and saying, hey, we're gonna get through this. We're gonna contact someone together can be enough. Now, remember, as a health and wellness coach, it's going to be outside of our scope of competence and scope of support to help support or guide a client in areas outside that window of tolerance, right? So if we notice them outside of that window of tolerance, we need to connect them with somebody else who can help them come back into that window of tolerance. Be direct with the client, talking about some of the things we notice as a coach. Some of the ways that we suggest referrals that we're direct with the client, we can talk about some of the things that we notice as a coach and say, hey, I've noticed over the last while that you have been commenting more and more about falling back in your processes here. We talk about it where we have that feeling. Maybe you could say something like, on that scale of 1, not at all, to 10, completely, how satisfied are you with what we're progressing here with this challenge? If, again, some of those behaviors that they're exhibiting are pointing to a deeper issue, we want to be open and listen closely to what they're saying to us, that we're mirroring that back to them so that they can also hear that, and encouraging them to seek other help if they're not making that progress within that lens of exploration. We can also speak about therapy and other modalities as being quite normal in the process of the human experience, right? The other thing we want to be able is just to let the client know that it's okay to speak about therapy and other modalities, that it's normal and it's part of the process of trauma healing. If they haven't used the word trauma, we don't want to throw that word out there to them, but we do want to let them know that getting support is normal. It's okay. It's part of the human experience. We can do that as coaches. And we also want to bring the lens into that trauma arena, because what we're doing is we're working as hard as we can with the client and creating that alliance and that rapport with them to do that best work possible. And sometimes that work can't be done with us, right? We want to get them with someone who can provide that for them. We want to be open to making that referral and consider having other professionals like psychologists, psychiatrists, doctors, counselors, social workers on a referral list that we could put our clients in touch with. Of course, it's also helpful to have an action plan for extreme circumstances where you have other referral resources like the suicide hotlines, 988 or 911, if you're in North America, or similar emergency response numbers in other countries for immediate support. We want to make sure our clients are taken care of on all levels, the mental, physical, and emotional levels that we work with them on. And we want to be open to the client's process of evolving, awakening, and growing. And that means connecting them sometimes with someone else who can help them do that. And of course, finally, ask permission to share resources or referrals. Be willing to say, I know that I'm not fully equipped with the skills that would support you right now. I'm not the right person for this particular situation, but maybe we could find other resources or people that might be able to help together. Would that be okay? Asking permission lets them have control of that situation. So up to this point, we've talked a whole lot about theory, right? So we're going to get super practical right now. So assuming that we are within our scope, what does coaching in the presence of trauma actually look like in a session? First, it starts with awareness. That's awareness of our own stories that impact us, awareness of any instances of countertransference where we're projecting our own conflict onto other people, self-awareness of our own biases and traumas, noticing when there's an entanglement with the client's experience that could be problematic or take us out of being present for them. As Dr. Allender put on here so eloquently, we can lead people no further than we have gone. So if we haven't worked through our own trauma, it's going to be really difficult for us to sit in that moment with someone who is working on theirs. Trauma-informed coaching starts with ourself. So we have to ask ourselves, am I getting entangled here, or am I coaching with presence and unconditional positive regard? The other thing it looks like is empathy. Empathy is so foundational to everything we do in coaching. It's sitting with someone in grief. Just doing that brings connection and brings trust. There's power in just simply bearing witness. You don't have to do anything. You just need to be present with them. I heard a story from a friend about the power of the words, I'm not leaving. And it's told by a man named Ryan Kuka. And it goes something like, he says, 2 days ago, I was out surfing and a young guy, maybe 20 or so, was just inside of me by about 10 yards or so. And suddenly he started yelling frantically, "Hey, hey, help me." And as I started paddling towards him, he disappeared under the water for a second and resurfaced with a frantic look of terror on his face. "The leash wrapped around my legs," he said to me as I got to him. "I'm here. I got you," I said, knowing he was in sympathetic hyperarousal and his nervous system was dysregulated due to the perceived threat, being out in the waves with the leash wrapped around both of his legs. In a few seconds, his state shifted. The look on his face changed. The co-regulating process moved him from panic and survival physiology to a sense of being okay, that he wasn't in danger and it had passed. "I'm here." Some of the holiest words I've ever known, he said afterwards. Just the process of connection can be so powerful. It's not on us to have to do anything. You can just sit with them and just listen and say, "I'm here," and then help connect them to the appropriate person. It also can look like clarity on how to move forward. So this is providing care that's specific to them, that's individualized to them. This could be in line with a therapist or another professional's advice. Again, this goes along with knowing how and when to refer out of scope, and then how to work with any advice that has been given from a clinical professional. It moves them from overwhelm to action. Health and wellness coaches are masters of helping clients prioritize and hone in on what is most important right now. This is literally what we specialize in. So asking what is the next right thing and helping the client create systems for that behavior change is well within our scope and something we are equipped to do and can help that client feel empowered to move forward. So what tools can I use on client sessions to support clients that might be going through trauma? First and foremost, use a calm, soothing voice and honor their boundaries. Behind the scenes, we create safety for our clients by creating safety for ourselves. What are ways that you create your coaching environment to be safe and grounded and present? I always start by making sure I can be present, making sure my mind is clear, that's jotting down notes if I need to empty my mind, making sure my environment is set up right. And how do you set clarifying expectations that create safety for your clients? Being super clear in those moments. How do you lead by example when you feel anxious or dysregulated in a session? Do you check out and look to the side and disconnect from the client when they're having a hard time? Or do you sit with them and say, "That is really difficult. Can we pause and take a deep breath together?" Are you comfortable with silence and holding those long silent pauses for reflective and generative conversations? You can even call that out and say, "Wow, is it okay if we just sit in silence for a minute with that?" In what ways can you be your own best support? When you start developing these skills, you're going to strengthen your ability to build trust and rapport with your clients. We also want to focus on strengths, values, and forward thinking. Coaches are trained to move that conversation forward in solutions-focused directions and pull those strengths from the past, bringing them forward as a resource, and we can lean on those in those difficult times. So we can think of things like, what strengths helped you get from where you were to where you are today? This can also assist in developing the skills necessary to create that self-sufficiency and intrinsic motivation. We can lean on powerful questions in our toolbox, like what strengths help to get you from where you are to where you are today? We can lean into those core values and beliefs. Where do you want to be in X amount of time from now? We can shift that focus. What are some resources and actions that can help to get you there now? We can lean into self-sufficiency, mastering that practice of life or humanness. It's not always an easy journey, but looking for resources, skills, and lessons along the way leads to joy, curiosity, self-reliance, self-awareness, access to resources and tools. And of course, we can ask, what help would you need to explore this? Clients are the expert in themselves. Often they know what they need. And just when we sit there and we ask and we've sat with them, we have built that rapport, they know that we're there for them, they're going to open up and they're going to create that plan for what comes next. Now, have conversation pathways for challenging conversations. It would be great if we set in those moments, we said all of the right things and the clients followed those conversation pathways that we had, but it doesn't always work that way, does it? Real life is a funny way of throwing us some curveballs, and humans, we are some odd creatures and we deal with trauma in so many different ways and it can look so different. So sometimes we're going to get challenging responses back. So that could look like maybe a client responds to you and says, if we can't talk about this stuff, then coaching isn't helpful to me. Ouch. That's kind of tough, right? What do you say if somebody says that to you? There's a lot of directions we can go. I just want to give you an option for what that could look like. It could look like saying, I understand that there might be some frustration here. So let's back up for a second. We can approach any stuff, any topic, any concern through the lens of moving forward. I'm getting the sense you want to process how this stuff made you feel, and that is important work, but I'm not the right person on your wellness team to address that. Exploring where you want to go and how to get there is more in the wheelhouse of a coach, where processing your emotions and gaining the skills to deal with this stuff will be more efficient with a therapist. I'm curious to know your thoughts about that. And you can pause. And you could even say, we could go in a few directions from here together. You tell me what feels best. Would you like support in finding resources for therapy? We can work together to find you the resources you need. Alternatively, would you like to shift focus to moving forward and continue to work together in a coaching relationship to develop goals and identify the strengths you already have that will help you achieve those goals? You're putting that autonomy and that choice back on the client, and you're still protecting your boundaries and scope as a coach. Other avenues you could take, get curious. What other questions do you have? What would you need to have in order to feel like coaching is helpful? It's entirely up to you how you move forward. What do you think? You can always put that back on them. But again, you want to protect your boundaries and your scope, but also sit with the client in those moments. They could also say something like, I tried therapy and it doesn't work. How are you different? This one's tough too, but it's a great question. It's one that probably comes up more often than we want to admit. Coaching is not therapy. We know that. So we can come back and we can say something like, yeah, coaching is not therapy. I support you to develop skills to reach your goals, explore insights or motivations that help you to move forward and develop a greater sense of self-efficacy and intrinsic motivation. I won't attempt to dig into the past with you to uncover deep emotional experiences or the coping mechanisms you've developed as a result of those events. I leave that work up to you with the support of a therapist. Coaching and therapy tend to complement each other, but we are professionals with different skills, resources, and expertise. We will look at where you are today, and I will work with you to identify where you want to go. Identify personal and professional goals you want to achieve. Explore the actions you're ready to take to move forward and make a plan to take action to create the life you desire. If for any reason I feel like we're treading into waters that I'm not able to support you in, I'll pause and request we revise bringing in that third person for support. Does that sound okay to you? You could also have additional talking points. You could talk about the main distinction between coaching and psychotherapy, about the being based in purpose and focus and populations. You could talk about how coaching focuses on visioning success, the present, and moving into the future. You could lean into the purpose of coaching as frequently about performance improvement, learning, or development in some area of life, while therapy often dives into the deep-seated emotional issues to work on personal healing or trauma recovery. Therapy works more with developing skills for managing emotions or past issues than coaching does. You could have all of these different talking points. I would just say you want to keep it narrowed to one. It's easy to overwhelm the client. It's also easy for the client to feel like they are being pushed off to someone else. And for someone who's already feeling like they don't have support and no one's there for them, or that something's not normal with them, any of those feelings, if they're immediately met with, hey, go talk to someone else, that can feel off-putting. So explaining to them and saying, hey, I'm not sure I have the competency or the skills for this, but I want to be here with you, and we need another person on our team, and not just that I'm shoving you off to someone else, can be really powerful. And lastly, after a client maybe has displayed behaviors that are leading you outside of your scope, they can tell you something like, I'm not interested in talking to someone else. You've asked her if you can give those referral resources, and they just say, no, thank you. Oh, that's not fun, because you're like, I had it worked out in my head. We had this pathway. I did all the right things. I offered resources. You were supposed to say yes, and you're saying no. What do I do now? It's tough. But you can sit there and you can say, hey, I can appreciate that we've developed a trusting relationship and you feel comfortable talking to me about your concerns, but I'm not the right person to navigate these more complex situations with you. We can work together to develop skills to regulate some of your physiological experiences through techniques you've mentioned in the past, like breathing exercises, mindfulness meditation, and we can explore strategies you found helpful to regulate your nervous system. We can even begin to build them into our goals moving forward. That said, I'm not the right person to dive in deep with you around this. I'd really like to work with you to find resources available so that you're fully supported from all angles and are able to access the resources you need when you need them. There's a missing piece within our current relationship, and I'm just simply not the right person to support you. We need a third person to complete this team at the time. Would you be open to revisiting your opinion around this and exploring ways we can build up your support system and resources together? If they say yes, yay! Yay, and according to our plan, we can ask permission to share resources, and we can ask them, to send them either by chat, or we can let them know while we're in a session with them, or if they have some already, great. If they say no to this again, but they're safe, we can revisit again, reiterate to them, this is your journey. You're in charge of how and who you seek out for support, but keep in mind what I've shared today and know that my expertise and my professional boundaries end where therapy begins. We can complement each other, but coaching does not take the place of a therapist. Hold that line on your boundary. If they say no to those referral resources, but they are not safe in that moment or not safe in a future moment, and they've told you that, you need to follow your action plan that you have set up or your company's protocol. If they have one, I would highly encourage you to have this protocol set up in place. Also, if you hold any other licensures, you may have certain laws or regulations around that as well. If the client says that they are a danger to themselves or to others, hopefully you have it already in your contract somewhere, something that says confidentiality is important for trust, but client safety is paramount. So I want to be clear that the dynamic holds the most weight in our relationship. If there's reason to believe that you are in imminent danger to yourself or others, I am legally obligated to disclose this information in an effort to support your or others' safety. So this is where we have that call to action to create your own action plan. I highly urge you to have this because in those moments, it can be really hard to think about what comes next, especially if you're fully present for your client. When you have already thought through all of these pathways and you already know what you're going to do next, this can be incredibly helpful. It's just like athletes who train, right? They're going in, they're practicing these motions over and over. So when game time comes, it is second nature. It is no different here. So as you're creating your action plan, what are some do's? Do stay focused and stay present with the client. As hard as you may want to, panic inside, look off to the side and go, oh no, I'm so far outside of my scope. What do I do? Just stay focused and stay present. Remember, you don't have to do anything. You just have to be present and create that safe space for them to share. Ask them what works for them. Allow for that mystery and curiosity. Trust the client to know themselves and their situation. Stay self-regulated and know thyself. Be aware of all of those triggers within ourselves, of that countertransference of where we may projecting our own traumas onto the experience someone else is having. Stay in scope with clarity of boundaries. Offer resources to them. Again, we always want to ask their permission before we offer resources. Get supervision if you have it. If you work with a team of practitioners, other health coaches, for another company, you can always loop in that other person. Normalize, acknowledge, and affirm what that client is going through so that they know it's okay. This is not weird. This is not abnormal. This is not something to be ashamed of. Encourage and discuss the resources with them as normally as possible. And of course, the flip side, some best practices that we don't want to do, right? We want to avoid these things. We don't want to shut down or change the subject. We don't want to gloss over what they are saying. We don't want to direct the conversation away from the challenges they're speaking of. We don't want to assume that we know what they need, right? We don't want to say, this is what another client has done, or this is what I would do in this situation. The client is the expert on themselves and in this moment. We don't want to step in and help them through it. This is outside of our scope. We would be way outside of our level of competence in that moment. We don't want to weaken our boundaries. That goes right along with it. We have our guardrails. We know where our level of competence and scope of practice sits. Do not weaken them. Do not explore the story of trauma with them. This would be well outside of that box of competency. We don't want to offer ideas to them without their consent. We don't want to tell them what to do or commiserate with them, share personal stories or information. They may be going through a really nasty divorce and they start telling you about it. And maybe you've been through a similar situation. This is not the time to bring in your personal story and tell them about it and share trauma. We also don't want to over ask or bombard them with questions. So when you create this plan, you can think about these things and then have your go-to referral resources. Think about community ones, nationwide, and start to build that list of referrals. Also think about how comfortable are you in navigating this process and where are you going to need support? What are things that you need to work on to feel more comfortable in if they come up? Do you work with a company or a provider? And do you need to collaborate on some of these best practices and make sure that you are aligned on what to do when these things come up? And also, what are the laws in your state or your licensing organization? If you hold an additional license, you may be bound by a different set of rules than just us as health and wellness coaches. It could be different, depending on where you live, could be different on where you work or which hat you're wearing. So if you're an RD or a licensed social worker, even though you're functioning as a health and wellness coach, you may have some different rules. So we'll definitely check into those. Highly encourage you to create this though. Also, if you are part of our YourCoach community, obviously at YourCoach, we are huge on supporting our coaching community. It is a core part of our DNA. And we do that through things like this webinar and events. We love supporting our coaches and leveling up their practice and supporting our health coachpreneurs. Another way that we do this is providing resources to our coaches. So in the YourCoach library, every coach has access to a curated list of resources and selection of resources. And there's assessments like the Wheel of Life and decisional balance, scope of practice documents, and things that they can use with their clients. To add to that ever-growing list, today we uploaded for our coaching community a referral resource document that you can use with your practice. It's currently available within your library in the YourCoach platform. If you go to the coach resources folder in the platform, make sure you have the most up-to-date version of the platform if you have it as an app on your iPhone or Android device. And these resources, they're meant to help you begin to curate your list for working with your clients. And we encourage you to use it as you complete your own plan. It's a wonderful resource. So definitely go pull that up. It's got lots of referral resources there. And they're broken out by category. It's beautiful. And if you aren't part of our coaching community, we would love to have you join us. You can try us out for free for a year with the code invited by Ash. We are passionate about the health coaching revolution. I hope you saw that in our mission, and we would love to have you join us. We are in the App Store and Google Play, and you can join from any web browser by going to yourcoach.health, or you can simply scan the QR code that is on the screen. We'll also be dropping the link for the quiz for the CEU certificate into the chat, and we will send it by email to everyone that's attended the webinar with all of the information afterwards. There will also be a link for feedback. It is super helpful to us if you take just a few moments to answer the few short questions in there. Let us know if the webinar was helpful to you, what pieces you like. We want to bring you quality content that helps you level up your practice. So that feedback is so valuable to us, and we read everyone. So we appreciate if you take the time for that as well. I know we have just a few minutes left, and I know I saw lots of questions coming through during the presentation, so we can definitely take a moment to answer some of those questions. Rebecca is our lovely community manager here at YourCoach, and she has kindly offered to help me out and read through some of those. So Rebecca, are you ready?
I am so ready.
Yay!
We have so many questions, so great. The first one is, I was thinking about coaching a client with a therapist I work with. Is it possible through YourCoach? And what would be the best way to conduct these sessions?
Oh, I love it. Somebody already has a contact for a therapist. What a natural collaboration. Yes, we have thought about that at YourCoach. So we do have co-coaching as an option. So you can come in with another professional, another coach, you can create a program together. You can co-coach and both be there to support your client. Lots of neat tools to support you in that, even so far as deciding how you want those payments to look like, and your coach will help you divide those. You can both upload support and resources to the library, lots of cool things, but absolutely yes. And if you have any questions, you can always email us and we're happy to walk you through that process.
Great, thank you. Next question. It's from a fairly new coach, and they would love to learn about the scope of practice and how the coaching through trauma could fit in there, if you can recommend anything for them.
Yeah, so always a good starting place is the NBHWC, so National Board for Health and Wellness Coaches. They do have a scope of practice. They also have a code of ethics. Both are wonderful to look at. Lots of resources out there. If you go into like trauma-informed coaching are great. Unfortunately, not a lot specific to health and wellness coaching, but we do have a scope of practice doc within our library on the platform. So if you're a coach in the YourCoach community, you have access to a scope of practice doc already, which is great. And of course, you know, there's lots of books out there and additional reading that are wonderful as well.
Thank you. Well, I think we answered that, but just for a double time, can coaches refer clients out to other professionals?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that one more time? I'm not sure.
Can coaches refer clients out to other professionals? Is that within the scope of practice?
Oh, absolutely.
And I think you answered it, yeah.
Yeah, I would always advise ask their permission to share resources or referrals first, because right, the client is always in control. So getting that permission first is, in my opinion, pretty important. So I would always ask that first. But yeah, absolutely, you can give referrals.
How can I make sure that I'm using the right techniques with clients? Great question.
Oh yeah, that's a tricky one, right? Because then what is the right technique? I think that's a multifaceted question that probably we would need a whole lot more time to dive into. If we look at it super simply though, if you are there with positive intent and positive regard for your client, and you are within your scope of practice, then you're doing the right things, right? If I would say those two things first and foremost. There's probably a lot of nuances we could dig into. So if there's a specific question within that, I'm happy to answer that. But I think otherwise we'd probably be here for quite a while on that one.
Great, thank you. Next question. When is your next webinar? Wow,
that is a great question.
Ashlee, you're popular.
I love these. These are so fun. We actually have a webinar in December with Sarah Hayes Coomer, who is fantastic. She's a Forbes author, journalist, and also an author of 3 books. And we're going to be doing a book club with her on the habit trip. So that's going to be in December. You can find information for that on YourCoach.health. If you go to the bottom and click on events, you'll see that there and you can register for it. You do get CEU hours for that, and it is another no-cost webinar. So definitely check that one out. She's fantastic.
And somebody's asking if the webinar is recorded. It is, for sure, and it will be available on our YouTube channel quite soon. If you're part of our coaching community, you can get it even sooner within the platform. So sorry, Ashlee, I had to jump in there.
No problem at all.
I will scan the Q&A box quickly, but I think I went through all the questions. Somebody was asking if you have any tips to motivate clients and to help them perhaps seek the help of another professional. That was a question I found also in the Q&A.
Yeah, I think if we go back to a couple of those slides where we talk about how to refer out and how to gently make that referral, where you can gently explain our scope of practice, how we might need another person on our support team, asking their permission, kind of navigating some of those challenging situations. It's all going to be dependent on the client, right? Every client, every situation is so unique. But if we're just present with them, we've built that rapport and they know that we are there for them. That's going to be the base of everything. I can't remember who said it originally, but somebody had said a long time ago, very wise person, that no one cares what you know until they know you care. And so you have to have that rapport first. And when they know that you're there for them and you truly care about them, it becomes a natural extension when you make that referral.
Great. And the last question is, somebody loved your questions on the increase of autonomy. Wow, thank you. I love your questions too, Ashlee. But the real question is if these sentences or starters and statements, if we can share it in a Word file, or are they available? And
They are
I'm
not
pretty sure I
currently
know the
available, but
answer.
but I do think that's probably something we could put together. Yeah, for our coaches in the community. Absolutely. I would love to share
Absolutely.
something like that.
And I'm sure it would be a great addition to our resources on the platform.
Yep.
So, well,
Yes.
stay tuned. Thank you for the suggestion. That's great. And yeah, I think we've went through all the questions here, unless anybody else wants to pop something in the Q&A box. I saw a question about the link for CUs. The email will be going out after the webinar, so stay tuned. And if you have any additional questions, you can always contact team at YourCoach.health.
Perfect. Well, this was lovely. Thank you all so much for your time and for coming and sharing this hour for me. I would love to see you guys all on the platform. And if you have any questions, please reach out to our team. We all love supporting our health and wellness coaches. So hope to see you on the platform.